In the opening of the story, a man named Frank Hopkins and his Mustang horse, aka Hildago, are competing in a long distance race when they catch up and defeated a stuck up gentleman. While enjoying a victory drink in the bar, Frank receives orders from a young army officer to report to a superior officer keeping watch over the Wounded Knee Indian Reservation. Frank arrives, observes the Indians, but continues to give the officers the command. The instructions are to take the Indians' weapons and essentially provoke a conflict so they can be shot. When the Hidalgo hears the shooting, he directs Frank back towards the reservation. When he got back to the reservation in the haze, he saw every Indian slaughtered. This saddens Frank and he was horrified. Frank and Hidalgo joins the Buffalo Bill Wild West show after 8 months. The hero of the Wounded Knee is introduced as Frank, now an alcoholic. One of the Indian actors in the show asks Frank to assist him in saving the Mustangs since the army intends to kill them all because they're not pure breed and because they run wild. After the show, Bill is asked about his claims that Hidalgo is the best horse alive by an Arabian man named Aziz and a British man who accomplished Aziz. Aziz, who's having a tantrum, wants this claim to be dropped since he believes his horses are the best. To demonstrate that Hidalgo is superior, they challenge Frank to a race across the Arabian desert. The race was called Oceans of Fire, an annual 3,000-mile race across the Nigerian desert region for a price of $100,000. Frank and Hidalgo left for the Middle East after hearing some advice from Annie Oakley. They ran across Lady Annie Davenport aboard the ship, who insists that her mare, that's a female horse, must win the competition in order to obtain breeding privilege with the Sheikh stallion, in other words, mating. When they travel to the Middle East, Frank hires a servant who is forced to serve the cowboy or infidel. That's what they call Frank, those two names, during the race as a retribution for stealing milk, or he will have his hand chopped off. Everyone sprints out like a bat out of hell at the start of the race. Then everyone slows down to walk and continues to walk. On the course of the race, a rider stabs his horse after two of them fell over a dune. Frank stops to look in horror, but a Sheikh rider yells to Frank, it's against the rules to assist other riders. There was a particular Sheikh who was a prince, hates Frank with passion, and didn't even want Frank to be in the competition. When the prince arrives at the first stop, he pays the people watching the well to deny Frank any water. Frank's arrived and he's told there is no water, prompting him to troll and remark about troops watching over a well in the middle of a dry desert. Frank walks away. Frank maneuvers back, capturing the guards under their tent. He snatches the water, then gallops off. Moments later, a sandstorm strikes, forcing him and Hidalgo to seek refuge in a deserted city. The sand has now accumulated in the water. After a day of recuperation, they eventually arrive at the halfway mark. The Sheikh's sole daughter is waiting for Frank when he returns to his tent that night. She gives him some advice how to keep himself and the horse alive. While she's inside, Jafar, her security, and Aziz enters, assume she was being unruly with Frank. Naughty, naughty, naughty! He is handcuffed to a pole as a punishment and warned he will suffer the same fate as stallions who are no longer useful for breeding. Frank now have a clear understanding they're gonna cut his penis off. About this time, raiders attack the camp, and everyone except for Aziz is engaged in the battle. Aziz takes the Sheikh's manual on horse breeding. The Sheikh's daughter, who's ultimately abducted while everyone is still battling, is the one who frees Frank in the end. The Sheik and Frank figure out that Aziz know where she and the book is, and so Frank beats the crap out of him to get some answers. The answer was she's with the Sheik's nephew, who wants the Sheik's horse. Frank, Aziz, and Jaffa takes a horse to the nephew's city. After the trade is made, the nephew noticed black dust on his hands after he pets the horse, which was the wrong horse. They flee, but not before Jaffa is shot by Aziz, who then is shot by Jaffa before he could kill her. Back at the camp, the Sheik thanks Frank. At this point, Lady Davenport offers him 30% of the prize money if he abandons the race. Frank didn't accept the offer. Davenport desperately offers her booty to Frank, but Frank didn't accept and ends the conversation and returns to his tent. And the race continues. Lady Davenport, aka Shady Lady, and her group were traveling where they were attacked by the nephew. She persuaded the nephew to steal the Sheik's horse, kill Hidalgo, and leave Frank to die in the desert, so her horse can win the race. The nephew and his group chase Hidalgo and the Sheik's horse. The Sheik's horse gets away from them, but Hidalgo and Frank falls into a pit, where Hidalgo gets a spear to the top of the leg. Frank managed to cut it out. He is then saved by another rider, who helps him get Hidalgo up. The nephew releases a pair of cheetahs, and they attack. Hidalgo and the other raider's horse try to stun them out the way. Hidalgo succeeds, and the other rider is then killed by the nephew, who then turns his focus on Frank. They fight and fight, and it ends up with the nephew standing on one of his own traps. Frank pulls the trigger on the trap, and the nephew falls in and gets speared, with the hit getting brutal in the desert. Hidalgo is about dead, and Frank is about to shoot him to put out its misery. But Frank stops and sings a lullaby. Ghost warriors appear, and here comes the jackass Prince Rider here to mock him, telling him he lost the race before the race started. All of a sudden, Hidalgo gets better, and the prince gallops away, with the race still in effect. Meanwhile, close to the finishing line, Lady Davenport's horse is well in the lead. The Sheik's horse gains catching up. With Frank in the back playing catch up, he soon passes the mare and heads for the prince. He turns on the afterburner, turns up the speed, and gets even with the Sheik's horse, then pulls away with the lead. Frank and Hidalgo wins, then heads for the beach, which is a few yards away, as a mob of people cheered them on. Sometime later, back in the United States, a corral filled with Mustangs belonging to the army were about to be slaughtered. When Frank arrived, he gives the officer a directive order to free all the horses because they all been paid for. Frank kept his commitment to his Indian friend from the beginning of the story by using his winnings to buy them and release them. Frank watched in silence and joy as the horses run free. He then releases Hidalgo to run free with the Mustang after a brief goodbye stare with Frank. Thanks for watching. If you like stories like this, please love and subscribe, and we'll make more content like this. There is one thing we could learn from this Hidalgo story. Never give up. If feeling down, need some motivation, think of Hidalgo. Thanks again.